Chris Fox, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Tim. I appreciate it.
Man, I tell you, I've spent the last 10 minutes telling you how great you are and how excited I am to have you here. And really, I'm excited for the audience because you are someone I've been wanting to have on for a long time because you straddle a number of fences. So I think what we're going to talk about here today is really important to those authors out there. Before we get started, though, let's do a little background on you. Who is Chris Fox?
Sure. So I have been a writer for most of my life. I started when I was a very young kid, about 6 years old. But somewhere around age 18, I realized there probably wasn't a lot of money in it. And so I left writing behind and I kind of moved into technology. I didn't make my way back until probably 2004. I wrote some short stories and was actually able to sell them and was really, really happy about that. But I had no idea how to write a novel. And so once again, for the second time in my career, I quit. And it wasn't until the self-publishing revolution, about 2012 or so, that I started thinking, hey, maybe I could make a go with this. And I put out my first novel in October of 2014. I've since published, 26 books since October of 2014. Most of those are fiction. I do have a fairly well-known nonfiction series, which is the one that you're alluding to. All of my stuff comes from a background in technology. I worked at a startup. We learned how to bootstrap, and you never really just had a job that you did. I was the lead software engineer, but I also had to do all sorts of random other things, including marketing. And I think that served me really well moving into indie publishing.
That's one very interesting point. A lot of I owned an internet software company for about 25 years. You came out of technology. Dave Wood did. I know Michael Anderle did. It seems that a lot of the people, and I'm not lumping myself in here, that are really doing well now have brought an almost, I don't want to say a software approach, but a very entrepreneurial, formulaic approach, if you will, to not only finding hungry markets, but feeding them. So I want to talk about that, but I want to go back to that first book you wrote all those years ago. What was that first book?
The first novel that I finished was in 2009. It was called Yuri, Silver Tongue, and the Violet Spire. And it was based loosely off of a role-playing game called Exalted. So I probably couldn't have published it anyway, but I had this great idea. I was going to try and sell it to the company that published the game. Mm-hmm. And it was probably, 700 pages long, think maybe 400,000 or 500,000 words of fiction. And the reason it was so long is I had no idea how story structure worked. I didn't understand that you would need a beginning, a middle, and an end. I just kept writing cool stuff, and I had no idea really how to finish it. Yeah. So like everybody, that's my trunk novel. I have 4 more after that one that are still sitting in a box somewhere. And I think that's kind of how you kind of break your teeth on this writing thing.
Yeah. What was the word count on that first book?
400 plus thousand words. I mean, it was like a whole saga. Every day I would just keep adding to it.
Yeah, I remember my first novel, which I'm not even going to go into details, but I think I got to about 250,000 pages and went, okay, there's got to be more to life than sitting here in front of this word processor. But you said you've always been a writer. Did that come naturally to you? I know when you were a kid, you talked about writing. If your mom's like my mom, she still got crap I wrote in a box somewhere, and we'll pull it out if you bring a girl over. But had you always been a writer, always interested in it?
Always interested in it. I always loved fantasy and science fiction. I started role-playing at a very young age, so Dungeons and Dragons. It's something I still play every Saturday, and I'm 41 years old. I've been doing that for 35 years now. Wow. And I've always been into that storytelling, that creative expression of building worlds in my head and then showing what I've created to other people. I love that stuff.
Yeah, you do such a really good job at world building, and I want to talk about that. Do you think that comes out of being a storyteller, though? That's one of the questions we talk about a lot on this channel. You've got storytellers, and then you've got writers. And every now and then you get that rare individual that's a little of both. And I think you're one of those because you tell a great story. You build a great world. You create these great characters. But, I mean, that obviously comes pretty easily to you.
And that, too, I think comes from practice. And this is where I have some unfair advantages. On the technical side, I spent years as a software engineer. And what your whole goal is as a software engineer is architecting these complex systems. And what I learned is it's very much like a story. So when I'm doing this huge complex software system, it's not all that different than doing the same thing with a novel. And so I carry those same skills over. And on the flip side of it, role-playing for so many years, you play as the game master. So it's my job to create all the non-player characters in the whole world and bring it all to life and to sort of present a story. But the action is the players themselves. And what you get to see as a GM is how they react very, very quickly and frequently. So if you come up with a boring idea for a story, they're going to tell you to your face right away. You're going to see it in their faces. And so I did that for decades, where I would try all sorts of different things. I'd run different types of stories, and I really learned what worked and what didn't.
Is that one of the reasons that you're able to write as much and as quickly as you do, as you've got that story running in your head as you're putting the words on paper?
Absolutely. I'm always running that through my head. I've got a projector going at all times in the morning before I write my scenes, trying to see what I'm going to do. So this is stuff I've been, playing around with for literally decades. And now I'm just putting it all down on the page finally.
Yeah. You are probably, I have read every one of your nonfiction books. You do nonfiction as well as fiction. And I want to talk about both, but I want to stick with the nonfiction first, because your books, and again, I'm not blowing smoke up your kilt if you happen to be wearing a kilt. I'm an old writer. I've been writing going on, 45, 50 years now. But when I ran across your work, specifically books like 5,000 Words Per Hour, Write to Market, Six-Figure Author, the old dog learned a few new tricks. Talk a little bit about that, because those books literally changed the way that I write, and I recommend them to everyone. How did you come up with that concept of the 5,000 words per hour, the Write to Market, all those wonderful books that you've written?
So what I do is every time I learn a new skill that I think is relatable to writers, I write a book. And the very first one, 5,000 words per hour, I only had an hour every day to write. So what I would do is I'd get up early, I'd go to the gym, I'd work out, and then I would take the bus into San Francisco to my demanding 12-hour-a-day software job. I worked at a startup. Everyone's heard about startup hours. It's exactly what you expect. Work-life balance is code for you have no life. Yep. There's only work.
Been there.
So I had to write in the nooks and crannies kind of around that schedule. And 5,000 words per hour was my attempt to get as efficient as possible at the 1 hour a day I had to write back when I had that day job.
And really, you were writing in volume. You weren't stopping to edit. You were just, could you call it stream of consciousness writing almost?
Very much so. The whole goal behind writing sprints, which I'm a huge advocate of, is to get yourself into flow state. You want the mechanics of what you were doing to fall away so that you are only left with your creativity and actually pouring the scene out of you. And you want to turn off that inner critic. And the reason for that is the analytical part of your brain and the creative part of your brain are very, very different. And if you want sort of the creative side of your brain to have the reins, you have to give it control. And then later, you can put on that other editor hat, and you can actually go through and you can clean it all up, and you can learn all the things that you need to about improving your prose and making a stronger story. But by giving yourself the freedom to just get the words down, it happens much more fast than it otherwise would. And you can kind of really hit milestones that otherwise I would have thought were impossible.
Yeah, that really was the aha moment for me, Chris, because I was one of those writers. I'll write, 5 or 6 paragraphs, and then I'll go back up and I'll start editing them because I want those 5 or 6 to be absolutely freaking perfect before I move on to the others. But when I read your book, the aha moment to me was, you know what? They don't all have to be perfect the first time through. And so, I have adopted your model. I'll send you a check for the copyright that I'm infringing in your practice. But what I do now is sit down, and it's that zone state that you talk about. Blocking out, turning off Facebook and Twitter and the cell phones and telling the 10 dogs to chill just so I can focus on writing. And I think the most words I've ever written in a day, Chris, I wrote 13,000 words one day. And they weren't all great words. They didn't all go together. But, when I went back through and did an edit, I think there was probably, 6,000 or 7,000 good ones. But with me, that zone, that flow state is the key to making that happen. Don't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I can't hit flow state, the words are never as good. So some days I'm exhausted and I'm just not doing well. And maybe I'm a little bit short of my goal, and I'll have an episode of TV playing on in the background. And those words are never as good as when I focus and I just sit down and I sprint.
Yeah, I know. One of my, I do coaching, and I gave one of my students your book, and he's like, well, it's not a matter of just writing 5,000 words in an hour. It's a matter of coming up with the words to write. And that's what I think you were talking about, is that movie playing in your head. You've really got it already written up here, but you're typing it out and getting it into digital format, right?
Yeah, and this is a concept that I'm borrowing from Rachel Aaron. She's got a wonderful book called 2K to 10K. And I read that, and without that book, 5,000 Words Per Hour wouldn't exist. And really what she said is you've got to know what you're going to write, and you have to be excited about what you're going to write. And when I started doing those two things, then I could hit crazy word counts. So my record in a day is 23,000 words. Wow. I routinely do now 7,000 words a day. That's a typical production day for me, and I'm trying to get up to 10K. Yeah,
that's incredible. You're always trying to best your own record.
Always. If you're not growing, you're shrinking.
I can just picture you sitting there typing away, looking at the word count. Is okay, do I want to use a contraction here, or do I not? But again, that's really an aha moment that a lot of writers have to realize, that you don't have to ponder and beat a paragraph to death. Just get that on digital paper, and then go back and you can start the editing process. Get the writing done, then start the editing and the fun stuff. When you started writing and you really started achieving this, is that when you started writing in the space opera genre, or because you've written a lot of zombie books. I love the titles of some of your books. Vampires Don't Sparkle. I love that. I wish I'd come up with that title. Orphans in the Black. Is that a play on Orphan Black?
I think so. I didn't actually come up with that title. It was an anthology that I was in, but I love the title immediately as soon as I heard it.
But I got to tell you, I love that Pew Pew book.
That was all Michael Cooper.
I saw that and I'm like, oh shit. I just hear that in my head every time I see that. So going back to the nonfiction and the books you have written for authors, one of the books I think has been pivotal to a lot of people is your Right to Market book. Explain the concept behind Right to Market.
So the concept behind Right to Market is very straightforward. I want you to picture a Venn diagram. That's the two overlapping circles in your head. And on one side is stuff that you would absolutely love to write. So every genre you can think of that might be fun for you. And on the other is genres with a very large audience. So your goal is to find something that you can write that's got a whole bunch of people that want to read it. If you want to do, weird Westerns or poetry, you're probably not going to find a lot of people that want to read that, and it's going to be difficult to make a living. But when I talk to most authors, those same authors are like, well, I'd also like to write an epic fantasy, or maybe some military science fiction, or some horror, or a Western. And you get into those areas, and now all of a sudden they can still be writing something that they love, but it's going to have an audience that's going to be able to support them, and they can make a living at doing this writing thing.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the old business concept of finding a hungry market. And that's one thing that you do, I think, is you approach this again from the entrepreneurial standpoint, where the books really are a product, and you go out and you find a market for those books. Because it's like you said, if you're just going to write poetry or something just that's a self-satisfying thing, nothing against poetry, Chris, but I don't know a single rich poet other than maybe Maya Angelou. Do you?
Right. I actually have done that research, and Maya and maybe 4 or 5 others that I found have made a good living at it. But if you compare that to the number of people who are making a 6-figure living selling, books about aliens and spaceships, it's night and day.
It's such a hot market. Are there others that you think are equally hot? Westerns? I know romance is perpetually hot. No pun intended.
Right now, actually, all of them. And we've entered a very interesting intersection in human history, where because we are fully global in a way we've never been before, every niche has a whole bunch of people that likes it. So across the planet, maybe there's only a couple 100,000 people that like your little weird brand of fiction, but there are a couple 100,000 people across the planet who are probably into that super tiny H.P. Lovecraft battle mime rap thing that you're into. Whatever you want to do, there's somebody out there that'll like it.
Yeah. So, but the key is to find people who will give you money for what you're writing.
Right. And the easiest way to do that is to look and see what they're currently giving people money for, what books are selling right now in genres that you're interested in.
And that requires the research on Amazon, which you go through all of that. So I'm gonna put links to all of your books below, Chris. There's what do you have now? Six
nonfiction.
Yeah, and again, I've read every one of them. I continue to read them. I also finally found a dog-eared copy of Line by Line at a used bookstore that I'm gonna. What did you say? Put it in the bathroom and read it every now and then?
That's exactly what I do. I put it on the toilet, and then every time I'm in the bathroom, I'll spend 5 minutes reading a couple pages, and I'll do that. It'll take me 3 months to finish it, but it's so worth it.
The old library. So I think one of the key takeaways there is really find a market where there is a hungry audience, but in which you like to write. Because I make my living primarily as a ghostwriter and an editor. And a lot of the books that I write, I'm not crazy about them. I'm crazy about the check. But if I'm an author looking to write in a genre, if I'm not a big fan of space opera, I probably shouldn't tackle space opera, right?
Hey, exactly. I mean, there are a lot of ways to make money in this world. If I just wanted to make money, I would have stayed in software.
Yeah.
But I want to tell stories about stuff that I love. And so I figure if you're going to be trying to do this anyway, write something that you really, really enjoy writing. There's almost certainly some overlap between something you'd love to write and something that'll sell really well.
Great advice. Are you ever tempted to write a book about the startup world in Silicon Valley?
I've considered it. I actually tried to do that as one of my novels, and ended up adding like aliens and a whole bunch of other things to it. It was just going to be kind of a technical thriller, and I just I had to put some sci-fi into it.
Now you've not only written the let's kind of go ahead and move over into the fiction side of things, because you are having tremendous success in the space opera genre, but you've also written werewolves and zombies. Take us through your kind of your genesis as a fiction author. What was the first book that you wrote that really got some traction?
That was No Such Thing as Werewolves. It was my very first novel.
Okay.
And it peaked right around number 4,000 in the store, which, for a new author with no backing is pretty decent.
Yeah.
It sold pretty well, but I learned very quickly that I had done a lot of things wrong in marketing it. So really the book was about, it was a thriller. Think a Michael Bay style Tom Cruise thriller, very fast paced. And it had to do with human evolution, what the origins of humanity were, where all of the ancient myths that pervade every society come from. And those were the themes. But when you look at the characters and you look at the cover and the title of the book, No Such Thing as Werewolves, people just assumed it was a horror book. And so I really badly misbranded that first novel. Even though it was well written, it didn't have the success quite that I was after.
Was that the beginning of the learning process for you, where you really started picking things apart and figuring, title, cover, blurb, keywords? Is that really when all that started?
Exactly. I spent 4 years writing No Such Thing as Werewolves. And then when I started marketing it, all these things became immediately clear to me from my time in the startup world. I would go to lunch with people who worked at Amazon and Apple and Uber and Fitbit. And so we're talking about all this stuff, and I'm starting to see how it would apply to books. And I realized very quickly that you need to kind of advertise what genre you're writing in a way that the people who love that genre will recognize. And I hadn't done that for my first set of books. So I changed it up and I started doing it more intelligently.
Yeah. What was the book then that came out next that really it started to click and come together for you?
Destroyer was my first knocked it out of the park hit.
And that's space opera?
It was a military science fiction space opera,
okay.
Yes.
Okay. Define space opera for those who don't know what the term means.
So space opera is a catch-all term for anything that's going to take place in space. It's usually action and adventure. It doesn't necessarily focus on hard science or on its accuracy. Star Trek is a great example of space opera. So is Star Wars. We don't necessarily know how a lightsaber works or, even how warp drives work, but we accept that they do because space opera readers don't necessarily need all the gritty details, whereas hard science fiction readers do. Like if you think of The Expanse, you need to understand how this stuff is working, and the fans of that who need to have that information, if it's not presented to them, they'll get very upset.
Hey, are you constantly amazed at how rabid these people are about the details and making sure you get them right?
Oh, it's incredible. I've learned so many things where I thought I had the right information. I'd done my, Googling, and I'd maybe talked to somebody in that field. I even took some horseback riding lessons to learn how to ride a horse. And then you actually write the book and you put it out there, and then you get 25 emails from people who are like, no, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong.
Yeah, I know. One of my novels is set in Los Angeles, and I got a street wrong. And I actually had people sending me emails going, oh, well, Beaker never crosses Hollywood. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'll blame that on Google Maps because that's where I do my research. So Destroyer was the first book. Talk about the success of that book.
So this was me throwing down the gauntlet. So by this point in my career, I had put out 5,000 words per hour, lifelong writing habit, and of course, Write to Market. And I'd said to people that this would work. And they were pointing out, well, but Chris, you haven't done it. You've seen other people that have written to market and they're making a fortune, but you're not doing it. And so I said, okay, that's fair. I created a YouTube channel. I started something called the 21-Day Novel Challenge. I recorded my screen every day for 21 days, and I wrote and edited Destroyer in 3 weeks. So 2 weeks to write it, 1 week to edit it. I recorded the entire process and put it there live. And I bragged that this book was going to break the Amazon top 1,000. And it was a little terrifying. I had no idea if I could actually pull it off, but thankfully I was able to do so. It sailed all the way up to number 200 in the store. It stayed in the top 1,000 for a full 60 days, and it's still my most profitable book today.
Yeah, and you really think that's because you did the homework and you did all the stuff that most people don't do. You didn't just throw the book up and put it up there and think, okay, this is great, people are going to read it. You actually took steps to make it work.
Absolutely. So what I do is I look at the market, I see what books are currently selling, and I don't just look at the covers. I actually buy the books and read them, and this is something that a lot of authors don't do. And so I see kind of what emotional resonance is in these books, what needs are being met, why people are reading them. So when I go to write a book in the same genre, I'm not going to copy what they did. I'm going to write my own, thing, and it's going to have its own plot, but I'm going to understand what the conventions and expectations are, well enough to present a similar product. And that's exactly what I did with Destroyer.
Yeah. And you have how many books now? How many fiction books?
My 14th novel, full-length novel, will go live on November 30th.
Okay. And are you staying in the military space genre? Are you moving around?
I am moving around a little bit. So my long-term goal is to get over to epic fantasy. It's what I've always wanted to write. And so I have kind of a bridge series. I wrote something called the Magitech Chronicles, which is dragons and mages in space. So I've got the best of kind of military science fiction paired up with fantasy. And so I'm finding that a lot of my military science fiction fans are coming over to check that out. And I hope that eventually when I do fantasy, they'll take one more step maybe and follow me to that. But I am going to be doing more pure military science fiction. I really love that genre. It's super fun to write. And now that I have an established world, it's really easy to crank books out.
Yeah. Do you think world building is one of the hardest things for an author to do?
I think it is one of the hardest things for an author to do. I also think it's one of the most fun for me. So what I do in my free time and have my entire life is world building. If I have an evening free and nobody's bothering me, I'm probably typing up random stuff in some fantasy world.
Yeah. Have you ever read Ready Player One? Of course, that's the book, the world building, and I just love that. And I think it's the thing that I really love about that book is his world is the 80s that I grew up in. Mm-hmm. So that, which is really kind of cool. You talk a lot about the formula that has been established, and you talk a lot about the importance of a great cover and the title of the book and the blurb. Talk a little bit about that, the importance of those items when it comes to selling books.
If you want to sell books, you need to understand your audience. So what I do is I think about it from the perspective of somebody who's looking for an entertaining book. So let's say that you're into military science fiction, because that's what I happen to write. Mm-hmm. And you're going to Amazon and you want to find yourself a new book. What are you going to do? What are you going to type in? As an author, we need to be able to answer those questions, and that's going to tell us what the presentation we need to create is. So in the case of Destroyer, I've got this beautiful, bright cover with very high contrast. You can see there's a spaceship on the front of it, and it's blowing away an asteroid. It's very, very eye-catching. The title of the book is quite clearly a naval type of vessel, so any veterans or people that are from the military are going to recognize that instantly. And then my tagline and my blurb are designed to draw those people in. I know kind of who the people who like this type of book are, what they need to see on a cover to get them to pause long enough to click on it, and then what they need to read in the marketing description, the blurb, to get them to buy it. And if you get all that stuff right, then Amazon is happy to show your book to the entire free world and make you a ton of money. Yeah.
So really, the more you know about the reader, the easier, well, maybe not easier, but the more efficiently you're able to create a cover, a title, and a blurb, and those key words to reach that reader.
Right. And I think a lot of authors do this without even necessarily understanding it's what they're doing. I think Glenn Stewart said it's like, how a fish swims, they don't think about it. Mm-hmm. So Glenn would read like a science fiction book every single day, and he did it for years. And so while Glenn will tell you adamantly that he doesn't write to market, he's doing all the same things that someone who would write to market would do, which is synthesizing a great story using all the tropes and conventions they understand about the genre.
Yeah. Talk about that. You mentioned the word tropes, and I think a lot of people don't understand exactly. Number one, they don't realize what tropes are important to a reader in this particular genre, but then they either don't write to those tropes or they try to tweak them. And as you were saying a minute ago, boy, you do that, the readers know what they're reading and what they're supposed to see, right?
Exactly. So if I'm into military science fiction, then you're going to have to give me a starship, and that's a trope. It can be an aging starship like Firefly, where it barely works and is, floating a hunk of junk like the Millennium Falcon. That's absolutely one type of trope. Or it can be a super high-tech, cutting-edge ship like the USS Enterprise. So you can take any tack that you want to, but you sure better have a starship in most of the military science fiction. There's exceptions, obviously, but that's an example of a very popular trope.
Yeah, it's like trying to write a Western these days without a clever horse involved. You know what I mean? It just doesn't click. Let's talk a little bit about the business side of things, because you're also very successful there. Again, I think you're very entrepreneurial in your approach. And again, one of the things that a lot of writers do not understand is that this is a business. You know, we're not writing these books for the, you know, you try to send a book to Wells Fargo as a house payment. Let me tell you, they don't take that. So you really have to talk about approaching it as a business and what you do to make sure it is run like a business.
So this again harkens back to me coming from the startup world. And it's the only reason I think I've made it as an author. For so many years, and part of why I backed away from writing it, is that I believe that we just needed to sell our book to the Big Five in New York, and they would take care of everything else. We wouldn't need to worry about any of that stuff. But the truth is, in self-publishing, you have to take care of everything. I had to form a corporation, and I've got to file my taxes differently, and I had to open up separate business accounts, and I have to hold corporate meetings. I had to learn how Facebook advertising works. So there's kind of a million little extra things above and beyond the writing that you sort of have to learn how to do. And many, many authors find that stuff daunting because they're new skills. Just like writing is a skill, just like editing is a skill, just like storytelling is a skill, marketing is a skill. And if you've spent 12 years learning to become an amazing author, but you have no marketing experience, it can be really daunting to start learning that. And to authors that are in that position, I say, just a reminder, you know, we all start at zero. We all started sucking at this and have been gradually learning. So as long as you're doing one thing every day and are approaching this again like it is a business, you're going to get to a point where all this stuff is second nature. It's just a matter of perseverance, I think.
Yeah. Even if you sign a deal with the Big Five, you're still going to have to do a lot of the business stuff. I mean, I don't mean to offend the Big Five, but they're basically glorified printers and distributors. You still have to do a lot of it, especially the marketing stuff. Talk about that, because a lot of authors are introverted. They really are not marketers. They're like you go around, you speak all over the world. You know, you've got a YouTube channel. A lot of authors are just not good at the marketing side, whether it's getting out there and networking, or even doing the Facebook ads and that sort of thing. I talked to one of my clients earlier this week who just blew a ton of money on Amazon ads that he didn't have a clue what he was doing. Talk about the importance of not only marketing your work, but knowing what the hell you're doing.
You know, I think that the issue that we have in our society at large is that we've become kind of a society of dabblers. We'll learn the basics of something, assume that we're doing it well enough, and then start learning to do something else. And we don't take the time to really master the fundamentals. So if you look at marketing and you look at this gentleman that you talked about that spent a whole bunch of money on Amazon ads, if he were to come to me for consulting, which is something I do, I would have looked at his backlist first, looked at his covers, looked at his blurbs, looked at his tagline, and all odds are good I would have told this guy, don't spend a dime on advertising, because until you have the right book with the right blurb and the right tagline and the right cover, putting money into advertising is just flushing it down the toilet. Your conversion rate is going to be terrible. So you've really got to focus on the basics. And I think that that's hard for a lot of people. They don't want to kind of get down in the weeds and do that really painful self-assessment where you look at, these are the things that I'm doing wrong, and I'm going to try and do them again, and I'm going to get some more critical feedback and find out that I'm still doing some stuff wrong, and then go back in and just keep kind of doing that deliberate practice. It's hard. It is kind of painful. It really punches us right in the ego. But if you're willing to do that, that is how you learn how to market. That is learning, how to get your craft where it needs to be.
Yeah, I think a lot of that for you goes back to your technical side, because didn't you test market like 20-something different blurbs on a book to figure out which one sold the best?
I did. And it's not the first time that I've done this, although it is the first time that I used Facebook ads to do it.
There it
typically
is.
What I will do,
the camera just goes fuzzy, or maybe it's me. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was definitely the camera. So basically what I will do with advertising or just my mailing list and using a survey is I'll try to come up with 10 or 12 different blurbs and or taglines that sound great. And I'll run them by multiple groups of people, and I'll get feedback, and I'll start tweaking, and I'll whittle it down to a smaller list. And I'll get as much feedback as I can, because at the end of the day, I don't care how smart you are. I don't care if you're a genius. I don't care how many times you've done this before. You are not as smart as 100 people from your genre that are your target readers and the things they're going to tell you. So if you can get that kind of help, that's where it comes from. And that requires a lot of different testing that most authors are not willing to do.
Yeah, which requires a lot of patience because we just want to jump. I just want to write that damn book, Chris, get it out there and be making money by Friday. That's all I care about, Let's talk a little bit about social media. I know you're very active on Facebook, your YouTube channel. Again, not blowing smoke up your skirt, but I love your YouTube channel. I find it to be one of the best, right up there with mine. Wow. Probably a little better. As far as advice and that sort of thing, again, relationship building, I think. But talk about, as an author and a business guy in this industry, how you use social media and you think it's important, I would assume.
It is to an extent. I don't think that you should force yourself to do social media. One of the things that I see many authors do is they'll jump into like 9 different platforms. They'll hear that Twitter's important and Instagram's important and Facebook is important. And so they'll do a whole bunch of them and they won't do them well because they're not really sure how to do it. They don't use those platforms themselves. So my advice to you as an author is to pick one platform that you already use and enjoy. Like in my case, that's Facebook. Mm-hmm. And then just sort of work with that and stick with it and try to make that as successful as you can. And only when you feel like you've done that, then maybe branch out. So like when I had gotten really comfortable with Facebook, I branched out into YouTube. But I still haven't done anything with Twitter. I'm probably never going to get on Instagram. I mean, there are a billion other social sites that I'm not going to touch. So I focus my efforts in the areas that I know, and that's why I think I get some positive results.
I think that's an important point because a lot of folks try to go too wide. And I think the thing that I like most about Facebook, it's kind of a pro and a con, is the relationship and the closeness you can have with your readers. Sometimes you just want to be left alone, right, Chris? You don't want guys like me emailing you going, hey, when are you going to come on my show? So talk about that balance, but when it comes to the relationship with your readers.
It's hard because so many of us are introverts, and most people can't tell this when they watch my videos, but I am an introvert. I'm a huge introvert. I don't like crowds. I don't like, being in a room with more than 5 people. I am a total hermit. I almost never leave the house if I don't have to, and that's also true of my wife. We like to stay at home and have intimate get-togethers. Maybe her parents will come over from movie night, but that's a party for us. So I get it. It is really, really difficult, especially as you start getting some success, to deal with fan emails and to go to writers' conventions and to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
Take it slow, I think, is my advice. It's hard. Do what you can do and don't feel bad that you're not doing more. A lot of us feel like we're never going to be successful if we don't get out there and put ourselves out there in that way. I'm only really able to do so myself because I spent about 5 years in Toastmasters. If you're at a point where you'd like to change, then maybe starting something like Toastmasters is a good idea. But don't assume that tomorrow you're going to have to go give the keynote at some conference in order to be successful. It's totally okay to be an introvert. And in my case, I'll frequently drop off the radar where usually on any given day I'll interact with fans. But some days I just can't do it. I turn my email off, I turn Facebook off, and I write.
Yeah. Well, at least in your case, you can point them toward your books, or point them at me and I'll point them toward your books. So let's talk a little bit about the industry and what's going on, because we've got Pronoun has just shut down. Amazon, gosh, I am of the belief that Amazon just makes it as hard as possible on a lot of authors. You've got Drafted Digital, you've got Smashwords. Your thoughts on what's going on in the industry? Are you a big fan of Kindle only, or do you like to go wide? What are your thoughts?
Amazon terrifies me. I love Amazon. They're paying my rent at this point. I'm making a ton of money off of them, and I am exclusive with them with almost all of my work. So all of my novels are in Kindle Unlimited. Mm-hmm. My nonfiction stuff, I'm starting to move wide now. But that's really scary for obvious reasons. Anytime you got somebody who's basically your boss, which Amazon in my case is, they can change the terms whenever they feel like it. They can cut royalties. They can do whatever they want. But unfortunately, the reality no one wants to face on our industry is that Amazon is winning the war. Every year we have another big company like Pronoun that says, hey, we're shutting it down. And if you look at the kind of the importance behind that, it's not just that these companies are going under, it's that the companies that own them are no longer willing to spend money to keep them afloat. And they're not doing that because they realize that Amazon's already captured the market. If you're somebody who reads ebooks at this point, you've chosen your platform. Either you read on a Nook, or you read on some sort of Google device, or you read on Amazon. Mm-hmm. But it's unlikely that you haven't found any platform and you're still looking. That sort of war was won by Amazon. And they have, 65% of all ebook sales?
Yeah, if probably more. Well, a lot of people, when Macmillan launched Pronoun, were like, why are they doing that? What Are they thinking they can compete with Amazon? Do they think they have to have that to keep going, as they are? So it was kind of a weird thing to begin with. You say you're exclusive with Amazon. You're not on any of the other platforms. Do you find that the trade-off between the exclusivity is worth the promotional tools they give you? You think there's you think you sell more books just because you're exclusive on Amazon? And
I know for a fact I do. I spent a year wide, so I was very, very fortunate. I came out of the gate strong. After my first 6 months as an author, Apple approached me directly, and I already knew a bunch of people at Apple. So I went down to the iBooks campus, and they wined and dined me and said, "Hey, you should come over," and I did. And they promoted my books, and I sold a bunch of books whenever they were pushing really hard.
Yeah.
But the second they stopped pushing my books, like if a 3-week promo ended, then I stopped selling books. And even with that promotional amount of money, I might make $3,000 to $5,000 at every other retailer combined. Last month, I made $9,000 from Kindle Unlimited, and that's very, very common for me. I eclipse all of my other earnings combined on a regular basis from Kindle Unlimited alone.
Yeah. And it's just the bottom line. That's where people are. That's where the readers are. That's why Walmart was the giant for so many years, because that's where all the customers were. But you mentioned it, and we're winding down here. We've got a few minutes left, but there are a couple of things I want to hit. The importance of a good cover, a good title, all the stuff that goes with it. What is your average spend now when you produce a book? I would assume that you've got an editor, you've got great covers. I know those are not done on Fiverr. What is your average spend now on a book?
About between $2,500 and $3,000. That includes a full edit for, let's say, an 80,000 word book, a really professional, top of the line, best in the world cover, and then all of the launch advertising rolled into that. So maybe $3,000 total per book. And
you find that is a wise investment?
Oh, absolutely. That always earned out. I had an instance earlier this year where I did 12 weeks to a trilogy. I wrote 3 books very quickly, and I tried to release them all at once. And even though they didn't do as well as I'd like, I still made a great profit on that. So $3,000 each to launch. And to date, I think the series has earned over 20 grand. So it's profitable as long as you're spending the money correctly. I don't think just anybody can dump a bunch of money into advertising and expect similar results, but I already had all the other pieces in place first.
Hang on, my little dog is barking. Do you hear?
I hear him in the background.
Yeah. That's my watchdog. I have a 5-pound Maltese that sits in the front window, and if anyone comes in the cul-de-sac, by God, I know about it. So we'll just ignore. So in the time we've got left, let's talk a little bit about what's on the horizon for Chris Fox. What's coming up?
I'm doubling down mostly on fiction. I'm really having a blast with it. I do like teaching people, but I prefer writing fiction. So I have 6 more Magitech Chronicles books coming out this year, and then probably 2 to 4 novels and other series that I'm working on. So it'll be a busy year in that regard. I do have 2 nonfiction books coming out. Excuse me. The first one is called Flow State for Authors, and the second one is called Plot Gardening. So both of those titles are tentative and could change, but effectively I want to start delving more into both craft and the science, the neuroscience behind how and why we write and write faster. You know what? I got to go make space on my damn Kindle now because you've got 2 more books coming out that I've got to go get. Chris, final advice. I mean, you've talked so much here, and there's so much good stuff that you've said, but final nugget of advice to authors who are maybe working on that first book, about to try to throw it out there. What do you think? Consistency trumps everything, and that includes both marketing and writing. You're going to try a lot of stuff that fails. Maybe your first book is terrible and no one likes it. Maybe it's good, but it doesn't sell very many copies. Maybe you hit it out of the park right off the bat. But no matter what happens, no matter what goes right or wrong with that first book, learn from it and then sit down and do it again and do it again and do it again. Excellent stuff. Chris Fox, whether you like it or not, you are my mentor. And, if I could do that beard, man, it would just be a beautiful thing. Mine will do that, Chris, but it's white. So, hey, if folks want to find out more about you, your books, everything you've got going on, what's the best place to go? ChrisFoxWrites.com. You can find my YouTube channel, all the books that I put out, and then, whatever marketing articles I tend to do.
Very good. And we'll put links to all that. And I do encourage you to check out Chris's books, both fiction and nonfiction. If you're an author, by God, get those fiction or nonfiction books. And also check out Chris's YouTube channel. Just does a fantastic job. Hey, Chris, this has been a joy. The next time you got a few minutes, I'd love to have you back on. I got more questions here to talk about.
Hey, sure thing, Tim. Just let me know whenever you need to be on, and I'm happy to pop over.
All right, buddy. Take care.
All right, you too.